Well, the truth is we really don't have a lot of information
Mm.
about this, but it is part of the pattern that we have seen now for some time of Ukrainians targeting, or let's say, of Russian ammunition depots, air bases, and various command and control centers being hit. Targeted and hit and destroyed. Some of them are in the Russian territory proper, in Belgorod. Some of them are in Crimea. And of course, those that are in the occupied territories of Ukraine, those have been very clearly sort of owned by the Ukrainian armed forces and kind of attributed to them.
What do you think? I began my introduction by talking about, of course, these meetings today. The UN chief Antonio Guterres meeting with President Zelensky. What do you expect to come, if anything, of the talks between the two men?
Well, it is a very important political statement that UN Secretary General traveled to Ukraine, to a country that's currently in war, by showing that sort of level of support. Um, to be fairly honest, I do not expect a breakthrough deal out of this visit because it is rather clear that many of the very pressing things that could be done, right, including securing the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant by either, having the Russian troops removed from there, instituting some kind of demilitarized zone and enforcing that. All of that really is very difficult to implement. It comes down to a decision of the UN Security Council that might deploy such a peacekeeping force, international peacekeeping force, for instance. And Russia has a veto power on the UN Security Council. So the visit of Secretary General alone, as powerful as it is, will not really, I think, make particularly any practical progress towards achieving what both he and Ukraine have been demanding, which is demilitarization of that nuclear power plant.
But also, of course, at talks was Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. And Zelensky told reporters, as you will know, he was very surprised to hear from the Turkish leader. He heard from the Turkish leader Russia was ready for some kind of peace. Uh, What do you think that signifies? I expect his surprise is the same surprise as everybody's.
Right. Well, it's simply, I suppose, Zelensky was surprised because he sort of on several occasions now established what Russia's peace might, or peace offer might look like. We have heard from President Zelensky sort of his pronouncement, his take that, unless and until Russians remove their occupying force and their armed forces from the Ukrainian territory, there's really nothing to negotiate over. I mean, to be fair to the Turkish president, he was instrumental, of course, in negotiating kind of a more particular, smaller deal, the one on getting the grain, Ukrainian grain, out of the Ukrainian ports and to, the world in large, given the looming global food crisis, right? So there is a success story there, and of course, President Erdogan does have a clout with the Russian president somewhat, and perhaps he feels like he could mediate in a larger peace talk, but. It is not surprising that Ukrainians feel somewhat hardened, and that there have been several points of no return, especially the atrocities in Bucha and Irpin, after which it seems very difficult to enter any sorts of negotiations. Um, in addition, there doesn't seem to be, on either the part of Erdogan or maybe international community at large, a way to apply any kind of leverage, any sort of pressure to the Russian side. So I think the Ukrainian fear is that, whatever these negotiations might look like, they will happen at Ukrainian expense, because Ukraine is more amenable to Western pressures, to Western arms supplies, right? Ukraine is more vulnerable. It is more, it's a weaker side to the conflict. So I think that in that context, Mr. Zelensky's surprise and also his rejection of the kinds of talks that he anticipates Russians might want to have is understandable.
I mean, it's a bleak picture when you sort of present it like that, and that they are the facts. None of these attempts seem to lead anywhere, and very few people have any suggestions or hope for how that they might. But it can't go on forever. Do you have any suggestions of how we might find some sort of a way out of this?
Well, indeed, Hannah, as you said, there have been some early attempts, including meetings in Istanbul, uh, in March, to try and prevent this conflict, this war of escalating into what it is now, and they have not yielded anything that either of the sides, I suppose, was happy or satisfied with, and the war had progressed. Now, I think we're quite in the thick of it right now. And there is a point at which each side still feels that there might be gains on the battlefield that are still out there, that they still could achieve, that will improve their negotiating position if and when that time comes. And of course, come it shall. This war cannot go on forever. But Ukrainian armed forces have made a surprising, they've surprised all of us. They've surprised the world with being capable more than we have expected in repelling the Russian attack with the Western arms supplies. I think we might see advances, especially in the south, to regain some of the territory. And concomitantly, we hear about the problems Russians are having in recruiting their soldiers and sending people to the front and replenishing their force. There's very poor morale, so they're not in particularly good situation. It is true Russia still has a lot of firepower, but firepower is not the only thing that wins wars. And so I think there isn't a clear view right now as to what exactly could be negotiated over, while there is a view of what could still be fought over.
One of the things I wanted to ask your thoughts on is this warning from the Russians that if an accident occurs at the power plant, radioactive material could, they say, cover Germany, Poland, and Slovakia. Russia's head of radioactive, chemical, and biological defense forces is saying that the plant's backup support systems have been damaged as a result of shelling, and says that several countries in Europe could be at risk if there was an accident. What are we to make of these claims? And, I think a lot of people have been wondering for a few weeks with the fighting around the nuclear plant, how worried we should be of something bigger happening. There's memories of similar things leading to great catastrophe.
Well, nuclear power plants were not built to operate in war zones. And stringent though all of the safety and security systems there are, they are not designed to cope with sustained shelling, with this kind of purposeful damage, with people, operators, working under duress in incredibly difficult psychological and physical conditions, when there are people with guns, marching up and down their place of work. So, I am very worried, and I think we all should be worried about something going terribly wrong there. We know that the 3 out of 4 high voltage power lines have been cut off by the recent shelling. Now we have an announcement that some backup emergency systems have been damaged. No, that's exactly what's supposed to kick in when the offsite power is is disrupted. And these are facilities that work with huge amount of radioactive material that's very volatile, that's very active. If it's not properly handled, it's not properly cooled. If the cooling systems are damaged, then we could have either a reactor core meltdown, or fire in spent fuel pools that are incidentally less protected. They're not protected by this really robust reinforced concrete containment chambers like the reactor cores. And in that case, there will be a release of radioactivity into the atmosphere. Depending on the prevailing conditions, it could blow to as far out as the Baltic states and Germany, or it could blow to Turkey. Depending which way the winds blow, and with precipitation, these radioactive particles will come down as fallout and will contaminate soil and water. And the nefarious thing about these fission byproducts, these radioactive particles, is that some of them stick around for a really long time. One of the elements, cesium 137, that contaminated huge swaths of land and soil after Chernobyl, the half life of that element is 30 years, right? So it's going to be around and continuing to contaminate soil. So we should make everything possible. This is sort of the bottom line: is we should make everything possible as an international community, some kind of coalition of the willing, if the UN is not prepared to handle this, to prevent that from happening. Nuclear power plants should not be operating in war zones and should not be run by armed people.